back, ladies and gentlemen, to Deep Thoughts on this soon-to-be chilly day. I'm totally ready for summer. So today's episode is going to be a little bit hard to title. So at this exact moment, I'm not going to try, but I'll tell you what this is going to be about. There's two sides of the same coin when it comes to, like, what I would say capitulation, where people either feel powerless against the image that they have in their brain. They feel like they've joined something and they're suddenly protected and they're in this upper echelon of society. Whether it be they're still a slave, like a worker, a Secret Service guy, some three-letter word intelligence guy or girl, and they feel like they got power, man. They got the juice. And maybe they do. Maybe they have sort of some temporary ability to move around the world in a way that they couldn't before. I guess those are the main two categories. If I told any one of you that you're a product of your thoughts, you probably wouldn't argue with me. However, and this may not be directly at the listeners, this may be something we just sort of powwow about, and you take it where you can take it, and I'll take it where I can take it. But there's something I think is really valuable about this time in history. Right before the election in 2016, again, I go to smoke lounges from time to time, and it gets, you get your regulars, and the regulars typically kind of harmonize into one belief system, primarily. And then you'll get some stragglers that come in, who are friends of a friend or whatever, and then we talk. And you'll hear these helpless opinions, is what I call them. And it goes something like this. They'll say, well, I'm going to definitely vote for this person. But the other person's going to win because they can rig the election. They're part of the establishment. They got more experience throwing votes, and they got friends in high places. Well, you know that they're going to win. But I'm with you. I wish this other person could win. And you hear variations on that all over life. And it's a sick frame of mind that somehow you want something, but you just immediately give up in your mind based on circumstances. Perhaps a paradigm of thought. And it gets really old really fast because these folks are sort of walking around, happy victims of their own life. And I say happy because everything happens exactly the way that they think it's going to happen. Except they're sort of capitulating into slavery every single time they have a thought. Well, I'd really like to be this, but I know the only job I can get is that. I'm going to tell you right now, without knowing any of you, if you're having those types of thoughts, or people around you are having those types of thoughts, we need to stop having those types of thoughts. A good friend of mine just recently reminded me of a really simple saying. He said, when you look at the overwhelming force of those who are currently perceived as the controllers of our world, and that's all they are, just a big giant perception club. He goes, some people have that old phrase, if you can't beat them, join them. And he looked at me and he goes, you can't beat them and you can't join them. You can only serve them, is what he didn't say. So how do you know what group you're in? How do you know what philosophical group you're in? It's all based on a bunch of principles. I bet there's probably 3 major gradients to humanity that we could discuss pretty accurately. Obviously, there's infinite levels of principles that the world goes through, but it goes probably something like this. You have your total empathetic giver. At all times, they are trying not to step on anyone's head, imposition anyone. They're the best of the best in terms of goodness towards others. Maybe even they sacrifice a bit of their own happiness to achieve that. In the middle, you have your go-getter, your doer. They do their best to not step on anyone's head, but from time to time they're going to definitely have to be stern with those around them, because in order for them to get their goals, they've got to make some people grow up every once in a while. It's probably me. And then on the other side of the spectrum, you have your person who will do anything to get what they want. They've usually always found a way to get what they need, but they will step on you, backstab you, whatever. Now think about it. Think about these three gradients. Think about trying to build a club out of those three groups individually. So the first group builds a group, and they are so absolutely empathetic to each other, it's no problem. Everyone's taking care of everyone. It may even get silly to the point that no one's willing to enjoy life because they're trying to make sure everyone else is enjoying life. Could be. In the center, you got a bunch of partners working together to build their individual destinies, to try and find overlap so they can combine for destinies, half the difficulty of a problem. And in the top tier, you have absolute dog-eat-dog mosh pit of insanity. Everyone is bleeding. It just becomes a mind-numbing exercise of pain and suffering. The most productive group is probably in the center, to be honest. And probably the best combination would be the first two working together. You know, when you go to someone's house, they're a really good couple. And I'll tell you what, almost always, someone's the caregiver and someone's sort of the bring home the bacon person. Used to be the woman was the caretaker and the man was the bacon guy. I've definitely seen the opposite as well on a couple occasions. But here's the thing. The reason for this episode is the law of attraction, the reality building frequency that you think. The older I get, the more I am very uncertain about the fact that we actually live in the same timelines. I've been hinting at this quite a bit, and I've talked about it a little bit. Think about how many times you've met a person, and it was sort of like two boats meeting in the middle of the night, passing by in the fog. You have a really close, intimate relationship for a really small period of time. You go to each other's decks using ropes or whatever, and then you part and you never see them again. Ever, ever, ever. When you're with them, it was very pleasant, very familiar. And I start to feel like there's a bit of timeline like that. I feel like there are obviously infinite variations of any sort of state of being. Like that's how the universe is put together. We perceive it as time because we're only perceiving a small portion of it in our current vessels. But I am starting to really believe that there are timelines where things are beautiful and there are timelines where things suck, and there's every variation in between. And the only way that you actually navigate and switch frequencies is to think a different frequency. Which is why news organizations, whether they be alternate or mainstream, that broadcast at you a frequency of thought, a conceptual frequency of how to think about something. The sky is falling, you're losing, blah, 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 everything's horrible and dark. Fear, 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 fear. As soon as you hear that and then you adopt it through putting it into your cupboard of truth, you start resonating that frequency. And maybe there's nothing nefarious about it. Maybe that in itself, the mechanism by which things are broadcast and thoughts are thought, it's just every piece of news that could be broadcast is being broadcast, and whichever one you're hearing is the one that you're hearing because that's where you are. But I'm going to tell you, I'm not going to be spending any more time thinking negative thoughts. Not that I do, but when I talk to people, when I pass a ship in the middle of the night and someone starts telling me all this, what they believe to be wisdom about how the world works, and their whole thought, impression of wisdom is to essentially capitulate down to those who that control them and just have a lot of good catchphrases for how it works. Well, the one that should win is not going to win because the one that shouldn't win is going to win because da 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 da. And it gets really to the point of like, why don't you just put that fucking gun in your mouth and pull the fucking trigger already? Because you got it all figured out. You got it all figured out that the worst thing that could possibly happen to you will happen, and hey man, you got this little catchphrase you're going to use to describe your fucking demise. Fuck that. Jesus. You're going to be that fucking negative about your existence. There's no reason to exist. But of course, those who listen to this show don't subscribe to that anyway, right? Tell you what, if you're watching this show, here's the kind of person you need to be, and you probably already are. If someone gets in your way, you be fair, you be kind, try to do no harm. But as long as you're being fair and kind and doing no harm to others and someone's stopping you, and you're pretty certain about the benefits of doing what you need to do, you're the kind of person that understands that change does happen and that you are one of those people that actually affect change. You're unwilling to pass on the stupid catchphrases that are so limiting. You're unwilling to do it. Oh, you'll listen to it. You've probably even had the thoughts before you woke up, but now you're awake. There's a lot of scenarios that have been portrayed in fiction. You may have even experienced something in your personal life, especially as a kid. Perhaps you move schools. That's a good one. You move schools or you move jobs. Anytime that every single thing around you changes, you feel disoriented. If you move to a new city, let's just say you're losing your job in Seattle, Washington. And then your brother-in-law calls up and says, hey, man, I got a new job in Jersey. You're going to be doing the same thing. Or something you know how to do really well. And so you pick up everything you own in Seattle and you move to somewhere in New Jersey. And you now are surrounded by mountains rolling hills that are different, forest that's different, the city architecture looks different, the people's fashion looks different, the cars are different, people talk a little differently. You go inside, and it's just the culture of Jersey is way different than the culture in Seattle. Now, on one level, you might find that really exciting and interesting, like you're just a little Magellan. But on one side of you, you might feel really insecure and strange. And you're trying to get your bearings. You're trying to figure out, okay, how much of this is just a change of fashion and architecture, and how much of this is a deeply rooted psychological difference in people? Do people get in more bar fights here or less bar fights? Is the class structure of employment really enforced here or not enforced here? And you just sit there for a little while getting your bearings, right? Figuring out what's going on. Once you get comfortable, you get comfortable. And you become part of the inertial map of, let's not change, guys. Let's keep it the same because I really like it like this. And that's fine if you really like it like that. But let's just say you got there and things were really kind of odd. And I don't mean to pick on Jersey at all. I've never lived there anywhere. But you get to some new place and it's awkward. It's strange. You don't know quite what to do. You would really like to know your coworkers, but for whatever reason, they simply don't hang out after work. And so you're sort of unfulfilled. It's strange. The money's good or sufficient. At that point, you have a choice. Accept that or not accept that, meaning stay or leave. Maybe you can't technically leave right away because you need to save up money and do what you got to do. But in the end, you're like, well, this is not my final destination. We have mental plateaus like that and destinations like that within ourselves. It doesn't always have to be a physical on-point metaphor. It could be just inside you. You have to define where the line is in the sand for your serfdom, for your slavery, for your destiny, for your destinations in life in various categories. Let me give you a few destinational designations for yourself. Your career is a destination. Your spouse is a destination. The number of children that you have either adopted or created, that's a destination. You feel me? You have to choose whether or not you've reached the proper destinations. And to just further the point a little bit, let's say you wanted 2 children, but you haven't found your spouse yet. At that point, you've got to find a spouse that wants at least 2 children. If you're really hell-bent on 2 and not 3 and not 1, then you have to find a spouse that's willing to go 2 to the best of their ability. You see how it strings together? I don't like seeing people cowered down to life. It really bothers me. It's usually always driven by fear or fatigue. As you get older, fatigue makes a lot of sense. Man, there are some people, raising young kids in their 60s and 70s. And, I can't say that couldn't happen to me, but if it were to happen to me, I would know what I was up against. And for those who are doing it, hats off. There's only going to be so much energy at the end of the day to deal with anything outside of the immediate needs of your children, right? And quite frankly, I often tell my friends, I can't remember how many times I've said it on the show, but not everyone has to fight the good fight. You can just fight the fight in your own life. The not really a fight, but you can triage the incoming obstacles of life in your own life, and just don't worry about it. There's a lot of people awake, and they're taking care of things. You could be completely awake and unable to contribute to changing the world for the better, but your frequency alone will contribute to those around you. You don't even have to speak. Just know the truth and feel it, right? So let's parse a little deeper here. So I've got 2 folks I want to address, and it will be our friends who have just sort of given up into paradigms. I had a guy tell me last night, he was talking about those that rule the world, the bankers, the BIS folks, IMF, World Bank folks. And he had convinced himself that they have thought of every single contingency that could ever happen, and that they never ever can lose, and that there's really no need for us to ever push back on the way the system currently is architected. And I'm looking at him, and he's very bright. I mean, my God, this guy was smart. But he had dug himself into this sort of catchphrase in his own brain of capitulation. And I looked at him and I just said, that's not true. Well, I said Hillary Clinton would be president of the United States right now if they had a contingency plan for everything. There would never be any backlash after a false flag if they could get what they want. Syria would be already taken over if they could get what they want. There is plenty of resistance, plenty of chaos, and plenty of people waking up and exposing what they're doing, and it's slowing them down. There wouldn't be the fake news false flag of trying to shut down everyone who disagrees with them, because it wouldn't have ever happened in the first place. So for me, it's silly to think those thoughts. You can consider the thought, but it doesn't make any sense. It doesn't correlate with reality at all. But that guy will say that and say that and say that. And because he's really bright and very charismatic, anyone who has never contemplated the fact that there are a small group of banking families and royalty families and corporate families that run the world, it's not really that clean, but it's generally that way. He'll introduce them to the concept in one conversation, and they'll say, oh my God, I never realized that, but that makes complete sense. And then the next thing he does is he buttons it up and says, but there's nothing you can do about it because they thought of everything. So what is he doing? He's manufacturing intellectual slaves with that regime of conversation. He's teaching the world the religion of slavery, of serfdom. And that's exactly the opposite of what we do on this show. And hopefully this episode will put in some more barriers where you simply cannot plug in the Lego piece that makes you a slave anymore. And it hopefully will give you some techniques that you can make sure that other people don't fall into that victimization of thought, right? But let's take a slight little diversion here. And this will probably fall on, deaf ears in terms of ever getting to the right people. But there's a lot of people out there, intelligence agents, who are patriots. They are the ultimate patriot. Doesn't matter what country they come from, they are ultimate patriots. And they've been selected and compartmentalized because they exuded this behavior in junior high, high school. They're Eagle Scouts. They are ROTC folks. They seem to just do exactly what they're told, and they do a really good job at it. And so they're recruited because they are excellent at what they do, but they don't have this psychological history of thinking for themselves. And then you'll have your folks that are sort of the previous group, but they do have the ability to think for themselves. But they sort of have that Church of Satan sort of approach to life where it is fuck everybody else. They're either sheep or they're cattle, and both get slaughtered. What is it? Ted Turner is quoted as calling us useless eaters. But once you get into these intelligence groups, you definitely get that high tower feeling. You do. You are a part of an authoritative body that has been given the perception by the people of being over the people. Just perception. You could blow smoke up your ass all day about your legal powers. They exist in the perception courts. But you get this huge validation that your life hasn't amounted to nothing, that it's actually amounted to something quite impressive. And then you start to work, and you start to see the criminality. All of them, I think, are aware in 2016 that they are compartmentalized, but even though they're aware that they're in a compartment, they are not aware of exactly what goes on in the other compartments. The compartments are designed in several different capacities and several different dimensions, and they need to understand this. The most blatant compartmentalization dimension is to simply make sure that they don't learn what's going on in any of the other compartments. That's the first dimension of its purpose. Once quarantined, there is a second dimension, which is the sort of the spin dimension, which is there to be given the impression of their own dimension, right, of their own compartment. They are to feel heroic and patriotic, which, because they actually are as individuals, it's not too hard to give them that feedback loop of their own existence. They're put with like-minded folks in their own compartment, and they are able to converse infinitely, and they validate that the compartment that they are in is at least a good compartment. The third dimension of the compartment is to say all the other compartments are just as law-abiding as you. The spectrum of thought that you can have in your compartment, which is good thoughts to great thoughts, is what all the other compartments are having as well. And when evil introduces itself into the world, you are the religious paladins that go and do the work of God in the name of the country, in the name of nationalism. The only problem is that the folks that designed all these compartments designed them with gradients of implication, gradients of intent. When they do their 3 to 6 month to 1 year interviews to find an agent to work in a 3-letter acronym agency, it's sort of like slaughtering a cow. You know, when you slaughter a cow, if you've ever met a butcher, they have a use for everything. It's unbelievable, right? They can take the jowls and make it into something. They can take things you can't eat and they'll boil them down into like a goo, and they can make them into products. Make them into other food products. They can make it into glue, whatever. They can take the fat off and do something with it. So what happens is during the interview process, they've already created a pyramid of compartments within the organization. And towards the top, it is that third category I talked about earlier, which is the department that is more Satanistic. And I'm just using that, the Church of Satan, because their whole philosophy is serve only yourself. Don't worry about anyone else's suffering. Their point is that the animals don't sit around helping each other in the wild. They simply do what they need to do to survive. And if one of the animals is being attacked, they simply run away. Now, that's not actually a true analogy, and most people who know animals know that they have a flawed view on things. Animals work together all the time to save each other. They just want to be selfish, that's all. So at the top of the pyramid, you have the most nefarious, disengaged reptilian minds at the top. They're able to do what they're told, regardless of how bloody, how immoral the command is, or the intent. At the bottom of the pyramid, I would say quickly the gradient actually turns fairly positive when you're going down the pyramid. Very quickly you start developing departments that would never do anything bad. And the reason why you need the huge counterbalance of positivity with any type of compartmentalized pyramid intelligence agency is that you can't have a high number of individuals that are acting in a nefarious way, because it would be very easy to find that conversation within the institution, right? There's only so many hallways and buildings in an institution where you coexist. And if 50% of the offices were bombing babies at weddings and trying to cover it up, you would find out. So they have to keep the sheer number of these individuals small. Now, technically speaking, they most likely don't co-locate very often with the more devious plans. But it would seem, and it would appear through the testimonies of those who are deeply involved with these agencies, that in the last 6 months, we've had a turn. And I've always said that this turn would happen. And it goes something like this. For those of you who have believed in a conspiracy theory of any kind, and you've tried to carry that theory to your family and friends, and they were not receptive. They called you names, they looked the other way, maybe they disowned you, maybe they stopped talking to you. Here's the beauty of what actually has taken place, regardless of how you might have been disappointed in the reception. They heard you. They 100% heard what you said. And that's extremely important, because if and when the bigger conspiracies come down and really become blatantly obvious to them, your little pattern in the back of their mind, the historical pattern of your conversation, will surface again. Whether or not they consciously remember it or not, they will remember that someone told them that the bodies and organizations that they trust actually aren't trustworthy. It's a huge, huge difference, right? And I think what's taken place in these intelligence agencies is that the overwhelming majority of compartments within these agencies are starting to wake up. You know, at first they may have thought 10, 15 years ago, well, yes, we have these clandestine groups above you. One, they'll fuck with you and kill you if you try to mess with them, which probably has some truth to it. But second, they kind of think, well, they know more information than I do, and because I don't know all the information and the circumstances, even though it's a dark thing that they have to do, it's for the better of mankind. And there could be truth to some of those storylines, but I would never claim to know a single scenario like that is actually truly like that. But I think what they've all figured out now with this globalization effort, one, they're about to completely lose all of their authority, the thing that makes them feel like they are important in life. Let's say that you work for a domestic intelligence agency in a particular country, but your country is working extra hard to join this globalistic group, whereby all of the power of those intelligence agents are going to be centralized under a foreign body, a different country, some centralized force. Well, now every day that they come to work, they're not that important anymore. They're like a blue helmet UN person being told what to do by someone 8,000 miles away that has no idea what the domestic requirements are of your country. And because they are patriots for the national flag that they serve under, I think some of them are realizing that globalization is a complete crock, that they're about to lose everything that they've been fighting for their entire lifetime. And again, think about it. How many parades do we have in the United States of America for soldiers? I think about 3. And so they're all, at that moment, remembering the death of someone that they served with. Or if they haven't personally had that experience, they are reminded by someone else about what that sacrifice means and how that sacrifice happened in the past. Every time the news comes on and someone says, let's go to war, when anyone has lost a buddy in war, they know what that means, a completely different thing to the snot-nosed, 100-pound overweight kid who's not paying attention at all. So I think that the very government agencies that are out there are starting to wake up to the formula. And I think that they're trying to affect change. I think they're giving people like Julian Assange his emails. Now, for my money, they're moving a little slow. They're moving a little bit slow, but to their defense, they have released some unbelievable pieces of evidence that the public simply doesn't have the intellectual capacity to review, evaluate, and pursue. So let's hope that Trey Gowdy gets a nice Supreme Court position, or that they just take the salvage yard chain off his neck so he can go eat everything that he wants to eat. That guy is a patriot on a level that is crazy. TreyGowdy. Trey Gowdy. The world was built out of guys like that. Your life would be so unbelievable. You wouldn't know what to do with the amount of destinies that would be before you. Every single thing you'd ever want to do with your life would be possible if guys like that ran the world and protected us from all levels. If you're an intelligence agent, you need to look up his speeches and look up what he's trying to do and look up why he does what he does, because he's your benchmark, folks. But now, why would someone join an intelligence agency of any kind and do a negative thing? Well, there's a couple reasons I can think of right away before getting into some crazy lunatic, which I think is probably pretty rare but exists. One, like I said, they interview you for 3 months to a year before you really get those high-end jobs, and you have to usually perform for a few years and show your ability to take an order and not question it. So a lot of guys, even though they're highly intelligent, seemingly intellectual when you talk to them, they still have within their brain the need to be part of the tribe at all costs. And so they'll do anything that they're told. It's a very dangerous mindset. So they're able to be manipulated, almost like a gun. A gun doesn't ask questions. You just point it and shoot. A knife doesn't ask questions. You just stick it into flesh. It does what it does. And so you have these folks up there, and it's the only way they get to go home at night and say that they've actually accomplished something. And part of it is what they accomplished, but the second tier of it is to have this illusion that they're being somehow loyal to a decent source. The second tier are folks that have a little bit more intellectual power, all the talent of the previous group, but they also have fear. They have fear. And it's the fear of probably something that isn't really quite that devastating that keeps them in check. Now, personally, if I was ever at that level, I would never have any children because they could hold that over you constantly, I guess. Probably wouldn't have a girlfriend, so I wouldn't have to worry about that either if I was going to do a little tour up in that level. But a lot of these people do. They have things in their life that they love. Family members, friends, whatever. They could be threatened in their own mind. They might just invent a bunch of stuff that's actually not being threatened, but they move with it because they realize they're at that top level. And subconsciously, again, they feel their accomplishment of authority. They feel the fact that they are living in the clouds of control over this planet. I was 2 degrees away, probably am still 2 degrees away from a guy that was in the contingency of government plane with George Bush after 9/11. The towers are still on fire, and this dude's up there with Bush flying around. His big summation of the day was when asked what really went on that day, his summation was, "You have no idea." And he says, well, the person who asked him said, "What does that mean?" He goes, "You have no idea." And it really, with further questioning, nothing was revealed, but the questions, the only thing that was revealed indirectly was that everything you thought the day was about, it wasn't about. Every single thing you thought happened may not have happened. I mean, it's just very fascinating, right? So at the tippy top of the pyramid, you have your ultimate sociopath who will adopt a religion of being that way if it seems to help them with their moral code when they go to bed at night. This is where you get this huge surge of the Church of Satan. And I don't want to say I don't take the Church of Satan seriously, because I do, but you essentially have two members that I've seen in my lifetime. You have, and maybe a third facilitator in the middle. But you have your dopey kid who's just a sociopath because they're complete fucking losers, and they just join because no one else in society will accept their total lack of aptitude. And believe me, the church doesn't really want them as members. And then you have your super top guys who are your elitists, your folks that do run the world, run corporations, and they sort of have to have a group of people that also believe that stepping on everyone's head to get ahead, crushing baby skulls and burning up villages with bombing campaigns is a way to live life. And they know it's wrong, but if they can surround themselves with people that are equally delusional, you sort of get this sort of feedback loop of acceptability that that's okay. And in the middle, you sort of have perhaps a Podesta is one of those guys, right? But why mention all this? Why zero in on this group of people? Because as much as we can affect change on our friends, to wake up and stop capitulating, stop giving up, stop telling yourself all these bullshit catchphrases like, well, all politicians are corrupt. Oh, I guess it's okay then, fuckface. Everyone dies of cancer. Oh, okay. Well, I hope you do then, If you're going to spout that horse shit, I hope you do. Hope you get all your catchphrases to come true. Hope that's the timeline that you live in, right? Because it ain't the one I'm going to live in, I'll tell you that much. We have to resist these moments of cowering down to life. Within your own life, you should not cower down to any of your weaknesses. Acknowledge them, feel them, and get angry at them. Destroy them. You're afraid of the dark? Well, you strip down naked and you turn off every light and you stand in that living room all frickin' night until you're afraid of nothing. You don't think you can talk to someone because you're nervous? Well, go up and don't pick the one you want to actually keep. Pick a bunch of random people that you can just practice on. Just walk up to them and say hi. And you know what? If you want to make it funny, you can walk up to them and say, look, I'm really nervous talking to people, so I'm just going to talk to you. Is that okay? It's okay if you don't want to. And just keep walking around the room. Do whatever you can to break down the barriers of your own psyche such that you are in control of your life. Try something different and random. Something that is benign or positive. Nothing negative, right? And I don't mean that, if you want to talk to people and they're going to turn you down, that won't feel a little bit like a bummer, but you just can't care. Who cares? You're expecting to have folks think you're a freaky person for a few, but the one person that goes, sure, sit down, let's talk. All of a sudden you go from crazy person to totally happy person having a great conversation with someone. It'll change your life. It's like anyone who's ever tried to hit a ball with a baseball bat. You miss, and you almost think it's physically impossible to do until, boy, you keep your eye on that ball, you don't take your eye off the ball, and there's just some magical thing the brain does with connecting the bat to that ball, and then you realize that's all you got to do. Home run after home run, base hit after base hit. Sure, it might be a pop fly, but who cares? The next time you're going to hit it differently. But the only reason why we are ruled down upon by individuals is because we've kept that paradigm alive. We've accepted it, right? There's something called transparency. Transparency is extremely important. Transparency is rarely used in a family unit because a family unit has a hard time not being transparent. It's a small group of folks. You talk a lot. The mail's lying all around. The underwear's lying all around. You know if someone's taking a bath today. You can feel if the bathtub got wet. You can tell if they brush their teeth because their toothbrush is dry. Pretty hard not to be transparent in a personal environment. But in a government institution, in an intelligence agency institution, it has been designed physically. These buildings have been designed physically to make sure that you have no idea what the other department's doing. And then they tell you that this is the way it has to be. Otherwise, it doesn't work. And you know what that really means? This is the way we have to be in order to be evil to the world. Secrecy. I have a whole episode on secrecy. I think it's time that we take inventory of all of the ideas that we have that we're so sure of about how the world has to operate. Tradition is one thing. Harmless tradition is one thing. But tyrannical tradition is a different thing. To whom does it benefit? That's what you have to ask yourself constantly. Who does it benefit? And oftentimes the answer comes back, well, everyone. Everyone benefits from secrecy. One of the sort of hilarious mechanisms to crush transparency, there's two. The most famous one is national security, right? It is we can't tell you because it'll compromise national security. What a load of shit that is. Again, there was a Star Trek Next Generations episode with Jean-Luc Picard, played by Patrick Stewart, where someone used that phrase in one of the episodes, and the character of Jean-Luc Picard, he quoted a piece of history I'd never heard of, but it turns out that national security line has been repackaged for over a millennia to screw the people out of knowing what's going on. But the lamest one of them all, and it is complete horseshit today, but the lamest one of them all, and I mean the ultra lame one that is complete horseshit today, is some type of global panic. We can't tell you because everyone would panic. Oh, really? Yeah, let's do a little inventory on that. Bunch of total bullshit, right? All right. Season 7, Episode 1 of Walking Dead. The cliffhanger was that a guy was going to murder someone with a baseball bat wrapped in barbed wire. So we knew one person was going to die. Figured they'd pick sort of an ancillary character, which they did. The first person killed is one that nobody wanted to see die, but you're like, okay. That particular character tried to leave the group several times, and so now he's getting to leave the group by way of death. And everything was fine until one of the fictional characters punched the guy in the face for killing that guy. Now, the dude had already warned them, anyone acts up, I'm just going to kill all of you. So then he takes one of the sweethearts, one of the guys, who's been a good guy, Glenn, and he bashes him in the fucking head with this baseball bat. And the makeup team did this amazing job of showing you a caved-in skull, a popped-out eye, a bulging eye, I should say. The guy's moaning and groaning just like it happens in real life, and the guy makes fun of him for about 30 seconds or so, then bashes his head in for probably a minute till it's just a popping fucking watermelon of skull and blood and brain matter. That was broadcast on national television. Right? And this is overlooking all the fake beheadings out of the Middle East done by the ISIS, right? That is the average watching audience, the viewing audience in America today. So what the fuck are you going to tell us that's going to remotely shock us and make us panicked? 9/11 happened and we watched it on television. If you want to tell me that all the false flags actually occurred that have occurred on the Obama administration, which is like 47, not including the ones, including the ones in Europe, horrendous bloodbaths, right? Now, a lot of us think these things didn't actually occur the way that they portrayed them, but this is what the public is being told. Horrendous things. So what could you possibly tell me or tell the public about any circumstance of terrorism, of threat, of whatever that's going to remotely surprise a human being in this day and age? And the idea that supposedly there's a warehouse full of Roswell-like UFOs, and somehow if you tell us, we're going to flip out. What are you, crazy? That's probably going to be some of the best news we'd ever hear about in our life. Oh, there's human beings that have been indoctrinated by three-letter intelligence agencies to hate, entire groups in the world, so we can fake attacking them and actually take over other countries. And we're bombing weddings, and they're slaughtering Christian children, cutting their heads off. And here's some photographs on the regular news. And oh, by the way, we actually have cousins in the universe that have come and visited us, and for whatever reason their vehicles ceased to work, and we captured them. And we actually have living ones, or we've had living ones. Here's some videotapes. Here's some dialogue. Here's what they've told us. This complete line of horseshit, that anything out of Area 51 or S4 could possibly surprise us, is crazy. And anything else you could tell us about the way the world is all evil? Child's play. Child's play compared to the fictional representation of reality that we see every single day. So if you ever hear that line of shit about how they can't be transparent, how it would create panic, hey man, it's not, in the 1930s and Orson Welles is doing the War of the Worlds on the radio. We're way past that, folks. As a writer in Hollywood and having plenty of friends who write stuff in Hollywood, let me tell you, it is everything in their power right now to try to create a villain that will make the audience remotely afraid of anything. There's a lot of us that think that all the villains that could be written have been written, they've been rewritten, and that the only thing that we can do for the next 10 to 15 years is create super positive movies, because no one can be scared anymore. The only thing you can do is create tumultuous scenes of suffering. That's about all you can do right now. I even think that arc is pretty well, exhausted. So if you're an intelligence agent, what are you living for? Why are you holding back? Why do you capitulate? Why do you cower down to the institutions? And spare me the handbook you were given when you started the job. Now, I think, again, beautifully, stuff is being leaked out, but I tell you what, let's just say, I don't think it's going to happen, but let's just say, well, Europe is actually making it happen a little bit here. You have this alternate media, and WikiLeaks is in there, and they are you say we're gonna do an unprecedented thing. In 2016, 16 agencies supposedly came together, pooled their resources, found all these amazing emails, passed into WikiLeaks. WikiLeaks then validates them over months and months and months and creates these batches that they think are real important, which they are, and they release them, and it changed a lot of opinions. But now, the fake news, which is our mainstream media, is now accusing these arteries of being fake, and they've managed to convince certain government institutions, and again, this is why globalism doesn't work. The UN themselves has supposedly banned several websites with no proof that those websites are fake, real, or anything, right? Just arbitrarily pick them because they don't agree with them, right? So now your artery of WikiLeaks is no longer functional. All right, so you did what you had to do in phase one, which is use what you had to use and not identify yourself as an agent that is actually pulling this stuff off. Because technically speaking, by law, you're not supposed to do it in your country because you perceive those laws to be valid when they actually do massive harm to the public by keeping a lack of transparency going, right? It's not going to work the second round. I'm sure you know this already. But you're going to have to start becoming transparent. You're going to have to start going for some, I think, much more immediate reveals. Meaning, perhaps don't reach over the table and try to point at someone else. Maybe point right within your own organization. But the nice thing is I'm sure there's a plenty of immunity and free passes and pardons for anyone who exposes all this crap going on in the world. And I think within any pyramid, you have very few at the top that you're exposing. The rest of you guys are all on the same page, fighting for what you're supposed to be fighting for, living for what you're supposed to be living for, protecting what you're supposed to be protecting. And all those things that you're doing, for the most of you, are things that society will completely back you on. Now, I don't have any family in intelligence whatsoever. The few friends that I have that have family members or friends in those circles, I'm not close to in any conversational way. So I'm personally not really in those circles right now in my life. They come and they go, and they're usually just someone I meet somewhere, have a pretty good conversation, and that's it. But some of you do know those folks. Some of you are those folks. Some of you guys lay down in bed with those folks. Some of you are parents of those folks. Some people have parents who are those folks. The thing is, if you can hear my voice, this message is for them. You can either point them right here or you can just pass it on. But as a people, it's really, it's two-stage rocket here. The first stage is the people. The first stage is always the biggest physical stage, right? The booster rockets on the side of the shuttle, right? We get the craft going. We have to stop accepting, and I think we're doing it, of course. We have to stop accepting limitations that make no sense. The food does suck. The food is completely poisoned. The water's poisoned. The air is poisoned. It is. Fluoride is not good for the mind. It's simply not. It's a poison in every other form and every other location in the world. Sure, it happens naturally in nature, but it's at such an infantile level of proliferation in natural things that it's negligible. What's put in your water is blatant. We have planes that fly in the sky and they're dumping chemicals out the back. And I don't give a shit what you think that stuff is. No plane should be allowed to dump chemicals in the air. It shouldn't. We don't let coal plants operate without, intense clean scrubbers to make sure that the amount of shit coming out the top is acceptable. That's where we're going, right? Was it Brockovich, the woman? She tries to make sure the toxic spilling isn't allowed, right? These are physical things that we all agree on. But what we say and what we take into our minds in terms of intellectual concepts is just like either pure filtered water with no fluoride in it, no chlorine in it, or it's toxic sludge or something in between. You are a product of your thoughts. And just remember, a thought that goes into your mind is sort of like a bird that goes off and grabs a branch and comes back and builds a nest. The nest is a paradigm of existence. The branch is simply a single thought. So the more thoughts that you bring in their brain, you're building barriers inside your mind, either barriers for truth or barriers for serfdom, slavery. And what's neat is, what's really cool is, and this is actually probably the truth, is that if I gave you a nest and I said, here's the nest of a bird, I want you to disassemble that nest and use all of the sticks and the feathers and the cardboard and everything they've picked up off the ground and build a sculpture of a bird. You could. You could take all that energy you've put into the wrong thing or the different thing and reconstruct it into something you really would rather have inside your system. And if you really think about the inventory of what we're trying to do, stage one is that everyone that we're talking to is living in some form of serfdom, right? They don't serve themselves. They serve someone else. And, of course, there's obviously beautiful versions of that, but we're talking about the kind that isn't great. If you eat poisoned fast food, you are serving the corporation's profit margin. And they're selling you food that has no nutrients in it, although it makes your stomach feel like it got full. Now, it should be noted that obviously we have riled up a lot of hornets' nests in the world. We've actually secretly funded a lot of radical groups in the world, and they really did buy everything that we taught them. And so we have a bunch of, I shouldn't say corrupted, but we have... corrupted is right, but it's probably not a friendly enough word to designate them. But we've polluted the minds of several generations of various groups in the world to hate us. And we didn't do it consciously, but because we don't allow transparency, because we buy into secrecy, these groups have been able to funnel tax dollars, drug money, into these organizations. Build churches that teach infidel passages as a base form of knowledge with no reading, writing, or arithmetic going in the minds of these kids. Just eventually you will pull a trigger and kill someone. Eventually you will push the plunger on a suicide vest and you'll blow yourself up in the name of your God. But the only way on planet Earth we're ever going to be able to rehabilitate these individuals, if there's any chance of doing that at all, is for them to look out at the world and it be completely different. And everyone is sitting around them with loving eyes, friendly eyes, saying, we understand why you're this way, and we'll explain it to you. Put down the knife. Put down the plunger. Let us talk to you for a split second before you make a mistake, before you ruin your life any further. I'll close on this analogy. I want you to hang with me here for a split second. You know, there's the old saying about the hand in the cookie jar. And the idea is that you reach your hand into a cookie jar and you grab the cookie. And once you grab the cookie, your hand makes a shape that is no longer capable of pulling out of the aperture of the top of the jar. So you're stuck. You got the cookie in your hand, but you can't eat it because you can't get it out. Right? And the entire analogy is that if you just let go, you can find a different way to get the cookie out. Perhaps there's a mountain of cookies behind you that you can't seem to pay attention to because you're looking at the jar, right? Okay. I'm going to tell you that all these false paradigms are a perfect correlation with the cookie in the cookie jar. They just are. At the fundamental level of that analogy, the human being that's trying to get the cookie has only one way that they understand to get the cookie out of the cookie jar. You reach down inside of it, you grasp it with your hand, and you pull it out. But that's not working, is it, in that analogy? As silly as that is, as primitive as that little example is. But that's the problem with society. If you don't think for yourself, then you can be taught that that's the only way that you get a cookie out of a cookie jar. And it's sort of like Chinese handcuffs. It's another beautiful analogy. You put your two fingers in, you pull apart, and you cannot escape. The more you pull, the more it grabs you. But if you figure out the Chinese handcuffs, you push your two fingers together, you use something to stop the expansion, and you can pull your fingers out without a problem. Because you've learned something new. You've thought differently. That's what's beautiful about the Chinese handcuffs. It's really a beautiful example of teaching your mind that there's a different technique. And then you can have what you're looking for. What do we all want in this world? We want to feel like we have a purpose, because purpose is love and love is purpose. And we want life to be generally beautiful. We want our destinies to be plentiful, meaning the choices that you want in your life have to be available for you to remotely get them. I know you feel me, but our mutual homework here is to continually talk to folks and say, look, if you're telling me that there's only one way that this can happen, or that you feel like you're going to be able to join them, you won't. You can't join them. They won't invite you. All you can do is say that you served them and they used you. That's all you can admit to at the end of your life. Sure, you might get a few monetized rewards. You might be able to walk in and get yourself out of a speeding ticket because you're so high up in the ranking of whatever organization you're a part of. But is that gimmick really worth making the world suffer? If you hate the world and you think they're all stupid, how do you think they got that way? Because someone undermined the educational systems. They kept the countries in a poverty-stricken index. You want the world to be smart? You want the world to love, to live and be your partner? But then we're going to have to invest in the paradigms that would make that happen. The big question is, what are you doing? What are you doing to make that happen? One of our listeners in Glasgow, Scotland, Jed Skeptic, is a friend of mine. He's 50% responsible for this show getting a green light. He's made a series on the homelessness in Scotland. He's just walked around and interviewed a few folks. A very simple idea. but very effective for us to see sort of how people are suffering. He started interviewing people so they could figure out what they really needed in life. They've revealed people that aren't homeless that are stealing from the folks that are homeless. We're always so sure that it's a lazy person. It's not the case in all cases, right? People suffer because they've tried everything that they can try, and it just doesn't work anymore. Corporations are told that if you're a certain age, you're unemployable. The trade skills that are required to maintain employment in this world continually to ratchet up. And as the manufacturing jobs that are more in line with their native skills get exported to different countries, there's nothing that they can do. If you look at Detroit, Michigan, in America here, you got a lot of folks that were fantastic at building vehicles. Well, now, those companies have been exporting jobs so long, they can't find a job. They'd be more than willing to work at what they're good at, but they're never going to be a C++ engineer. They're never going to write a movie, make a painting. It's just not what they're good at. So if we rebuild this planet logically and get rid of all these ridiculous cowarding moments in society, I think we'll find that the thing will rehabilitate quite quickly. And there's plenty of infinite challenges that we may never solve in the next 1,000 years, but at least let's get to the hard ones. Let's get to the ones where we're actually trying to help each other. Let's get to those problems and stop dicking around with all this manipulation, this everyone hates everyone thought process that keeps going on. I know I'm preaching to the choir, trust me. Anyway, I think that's about it. If you dig this series, please subscribe. If you dig this show, please like. DeepThoughtsRadio.com for all the feeds to the show. If you just want to go straight to the podcast, it's hosted at MKUltraRadio.com. You can also find it at iTunes if that's your gig. Anyway, take care of yourself and someone else, and I'll see you in the next Deep Thoughts. Over now.